Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for June 2022. It's been a nice and summery month in the project. We've seen about 1,200 commits from around 100 authors. And the commits are split between the Serenity and Jakt repositories as we continue to bring up the Jakt language. And the split is something like 60-40, and Serenity is leading with a bit more activity, but things are active and nice in both areas. And something that's really cool this month is we had 2 podcasts. So for our German-speaking viewers, a couple of people from the community went on a show called Focus on Linux to talk about SerenityOS and the community and the project in German. So if you are interested in that, there's a link in the video description. I'm told it was a good show. And I personally went on another podcast called The Good Time Show. And it was a lovely time, a bit of a personal podcast as well. Talked about my own personal history, but also the creation and continuation of the SerenityOS project. So if you are interested in that, I think it was a really nice conversation that I had with Aarthi and Sriram. So link to that in the video description as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Jakt programming language. So we decided to put the language into feature freeze this month until we can bring up the self-hosted compiler. That is the Jakt compiler written in Jakt itself. So we just want to get the language to a point where it can be used to develop itself, and we can get rid of the Rust-based Bootstrap compiler. And I'm happy to report that we are currently at 38% pass rate on the unit tests. So we've been making real good progress. A bunch of people have been helping out. But there's also a whole bunch of work left to do, of course. It's a bit of a grind, but I think we're going to be in a really good position once we're up and running, because then we're not going to have 2 compilers to implement new features in, but we can focus specifically on the self-hosted compiler and just rocket ahead once we get there. But until we do, that's where my own focus has been for the most part of the month. But we still have a whole bunch of other stuff happening in Serenity, especially in the browser. So we're going to cover that as well.
All right, so let's have a look at all the LibJS changes from the last month. And there have been a couple. So first of all, we have 2 new stage 3 proposals implemented. The first one is the change array by copy proposal, which you can see here on GitHub, showing some examples. And as the name implies, that mirrors some of the existing array prototype functions, except they don't mutate the original array, but return a changed copy. And so that's useful in a number of cases. And let's have a look at some examples. So for example, we can make a random array with a bunch of numbers here, like this. Let's assign that to A. And then we can say A to sorted. And now we get back a sorted array. But if we look at the original one again, it's still unsorted. So this is actually a new array. So if we assign this to another variable and then compare them, you can see that they are indeed not equal. And so the original one is kept untouched. And we can also do reversed, for example. So B is now our sorted array. And then we can say C equals B to sorted. And then, not to sorted, to reversed, like this. And now B is, of course, not equal to C. But C is the reversed version of B. So that's really nice. And I did the first half of that, so implementing all the array ones, and then GitHub user bsafe started implementing the typed array variant. So for example, we have 2 sorted for typed array. So if I make a new one like this, uint8 array, for example, passing a bunch of values like this. I get a typed array, of course, and now I can say t.toSorted. And as you can see from the buffer, so the underlying array buffer is at a different address than the previous one. So here you can see 9b and the other one is 9c. And one is in the original order and one is sorted. So thank you for adding that. And then Eden added the another stage 3 proposal, which is symbol as WeakMap keys. So a WeakMap is sort of like a regular map or object, except that it doesn't hold a strong reference to the key. And so if your key gets garbage collected elsewhere, then it just disappears from the map, basically. And previously you could only have objects as keys, but now they added symbols as keys, and so that works as you would expect, basically. So making a new weak map like this, and then a symbol. And then you can simply say m.set symbol is 123 or whatever. And then, of course, the same for get. And the actual deletion part is a bit tricky to showcase in the REPL, because obviously now if I delete the symbol and then garbage collected, I can no longer access it. But for the tests, we have some internal helpers to ensure that the value is actually gone. And then Luke did some work on the bytecode interpreter. So, for example, they added break and continue label support. So if we look at an example here, you can see we simply say console.log start, and at the end console.log end. And then we have a nested loop with a outer loop label. And so if you would just break here, it would break from this loop, but the outer loop would continue going indefinitely. But since we have a break with a label here, we can basically jump to the outer loop, break from that, and then should continue here. And so let's see if that works. So running JS with the -b flag, and also D for debug. And then I can load the bytecode labels file. And as you can see, it prints out start, it prints out end, it doesn't get stuck in a loop. And we have some nice bytecode generation here. Yeah, so definitely a great change, and also made the test262 score jump up by a little bit, which is always nice. So it turns out what I said in the previous segment isn't actually true, and we have a third stage 3 proposal this month. So while I was recording that, Eden finished a pull request to implement Intl.DurationFormat, which is very similar to Intl.NumberFormat in the way it works, except it's for durations. So like anything from years to months down to nanoseconds, I think is the lowest it supports. And I have some examples here, so let's demo that. So first of all, we need a JS REPL, and then a duration is basically a simple object with one or more known properties. So for example, I don't have to specify hours or minutes, anything like that. I can just say years, months, and days, 1, 2, 3, and then I make a new duration I make a new duration format, optionally passing a locale, in this case English, or EN/US I think it would default to, and then I say .format, passing that duration. And that returns a string, which is human readable and says 1 year, 2 months, and 3 days. So this is basically a nice way to get from a machine readable structure to a human readable one. And you see it doesn't just put commas there, it also puts like an and before the last segment. And let's see, we can also make a way more complex one. So specifying all the properties, again as a regular object, and then formatting that again. And now it says year, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, seconds, and so on, all the way down to nanoseconds. And we can also pass some options. So also the same as number format, basically. So here we have style narrow, for example, which will now say Y and M and W and D and H and so on. This is a macro sign character, which we are obviously missing from the font here. That will also show up. Or we can specify a different language. So since we use libunicode for this, we can rely on anything that we extract from the CLDR, I believe. So we definitely have a bunch of languages available. So for example, we can try German. And then it says Jahr, Monate, Wochen, Tage, Stunden, and so on. Or we can try French. And then let me move that. That also works. Or we can also format to parts. So that's really nice. So you're not supposed to like split that string if you only want individual segments. You can simply call format to parts, and it will do that for you. So it returns an array, and then we can see here's a simple object which has type element, value 1 year. And then the next one is type literal, value, it's comma and a space. And so all of these segments combined result in the string, but it basically takes it apart for us. And so the next one is 2 months, and then we have the weeks and so on. So that's really cool as well. And the probably nicest thing about this is because it just reads properties from an object, it integrates with temporal very easily. So we can make a duration, and that has all these properties, and so we can pass that and it will format it accordingly. So let's give that a try. So we can get to the epoch time, which is like Unix time 0 timestamp in 1970, which is now a plain date in the ISO 8601 calendar. And then we can get the current date. Oops. We can get the current date, so today, which is June 2022. And then we can simply say, please give us, so now.since epoch is a duration, a temporal duration. So I think we can just say like this. Oh, it's not now, it's today. So today, since epoch is so and so many days. And then feeding that to a new Intl.DurationFormat gives us 19,000 and then a comma for nice separation, 173 days. So that's an awesome way to make a human readable string of a arbitrary duration, basically. So yeah, huge thanks to Idan for implementing this. I wasn't aware he was working on that, but it's great to see the outcome. And definitely feel free to have a look at the PR as well. It's still up. So let's have a look at all the browser changes from June. And in fact, there is so much to cover that I almost run out of memory on the system here. So I hope this works out. Just loading all the demos in the browser. First of all, we have MacDew, who went on a massive crusade this month to paint a lot of things in much nicer ways. So for example, Anti-Aliased. So we have a regular painter in libgfx that just paints pixel by pixel basically, and then an anti-aliased one that does sort of smoothing. And so they went ahead and first of all changed the list markers, which now look a lot nicer. Previously you would kind of see the pixel edges there. So that's a nice change. And then we have the corners of border radius. are now anti-aliased. So previously we would also see the pixels sort of like a staircase. So that's definitely looking a lot nicer, especially if you make a perfect circle. We'll get to that in a bit. And then they also did that for dotted lines. So here you can see now much nicer circles. What else? So we have a bunch of new border radiuses. So you can say you want to make an ellipsis, for example. So previously we had just regular border radiuses that are basically equal into both directions. And so here you can see, obviously, the radius is different on the X and Y axis, which leads to an ellipsis. For example, here just the rectangle with 50% radius. Or you can completely go wild and make it look like this. Or just one corner or different corners. So we got all the options now. And the same also works for background images. So you can see like a rounded shape around an image, or you make it a perfect circle, whatever you want. And also, as you can see, that's also anti-aliased here. So it doesn't bleed into the background in a sort of rough edge, but it's really nice. And then down here we have some regular border radiuses on an image actually. So this is background image, and this is just an image tag where it says border radius whatever. So that's really awesome. And you definitely notice the difference on so many websites because, you know, buttons have border radius, profile images often have a border radius, and everywhere it just looks a lot nicer now. So a huge thanks to MacView for making all these things happen. But we're not done yet, so they also added more support for box shadows. So you can actually have a box shadow with a border radius now, which is really cool and leads to this funny egg shaped thingy that they made for a testing page, which I turned into a wallpaper. And then you can stack them and you see them nicely blur together, or you make it on a perfect circle or a rounded rectangle, and overlaying over images works. So again, you're going to notice that on a lot of websites because they will not only have border radiuses, they will also have shadows a lot. So that's really awesome. And then we had a little surprise change. So Luke went ahead and started implementing WebGL. Now, before you get too excited, for actual useful WebGL, we probably need a OpenGL 2 or 3 implementation. I think ours is currently around version 1. So there's not a whole lot you can do with that yet. But the foundations are there. And as you can see, this is, let's have a look at the source code. This is 2 canvas elements, and then we say get context WebGL. So instead of the 2 normal 2D context, we get a WebGL context, and we have WebGL functionality on that. And so actually, if you build LibGL, which is powering this obviously, in debug mode, you will see a little overlay on both of these, displaying stuff like FPS and a bunch of rendering information. So that's really awesome. And I like how they just appeared one day and said, yay, my experiment worked out, and here's WebGL. So that was cool to see. Luke also implemented a content filter for DNS prefetch. So we have this basic content filtering system in the browser where you can say in the settings, you just specify a bunch of domains here, or paths rather. And then we will block the request if it matches. And so that's basic ad and tracker blocking. So now that's also working for DNS prefetch. So if a page has like 20 DNS prefetches, that obviously doesn't make sense to load them if the actual request later on would be blocked. And Luke also added a bunch of new entries to that list, so more blocking. And Luke also added the HTML base element, which I believe was used on some Google page, Google login page, which is used to have a different URL base for relative URLs. So instead of resolving to whatever is up in here, it could then resolve to a relative to some other URL. Okay, enough of this blinking. Then next up we have Carol, who implemented double-click events in the browser. Let me open this again. So a regular double-click event, so integrating that into the browser, that it sends the event to the engine, and then the user could, for example, add a JavaScript handler. That, and also that it would select the word underneath by default. Doesn't work right here. Maybe it works on the new tab page. Yes, so if I double click on a word, it gets selected by default. Now there's no triple clicking yet, so if I triple click in many browsers, it would then select the whole line. That's not implemented yet, but we'll get there. And then you can see this new page, which was implemented by Jakt. And they added a preference for that. So if you want a blank, so this is a new tab page. So if I make a new tab, it's going to be different from the home page, which is still this old page here. And so this is a preference. In these settings, you can simply specify any URL there. And it's basically a little browser start page. So you can put in some search term here and then search using your favorite search engine, for example. So that's much more useful than having the home page, which is just our testing stuff for every new tab. So thank you, Jakt, for that. And then what else? There is a bunch of new properties on the window object now. So window event handlers, one of them being on unhandled rejection, which is sort of a handler function that you can specify, and then it will be invoked for every promise that didn't have a handler but was rejected, which is usually if your promise did throw an exception that you didn't expect. And then tools like Sentry, which is an error tracking software, use that to report them to developers. So actually on many websites, we would now report those errors to Sentry. So here's a basic demo. Just set timeout after 1 second, and then we reject a promise. And in the handler function, we simply say alert. And so if I open that in the browser, after 1 second, we get an alert. So that's really neat. Was implemented by Luke as well. Very active this month. And so the fact that this opened like this is also something new, because previously the underlying web content engine, which runs in a different process, had only /res and some other directories unveiled. So it couldn't actually open websites from the home directory. So I'm currently in /home anon, where you would usually put your websites for just local testing, and you had to copy them to /res, which was really annoying. And so now the browser also implements the regular file system access, the same way the text editor does it, for example. And that way it doesn't need to unveil, but can selectively open files from your home directory or any other directory. So that's really cool. And was implemented by Lucas. So thank you very much for that. It was a long-standing issue. We had that for a long time. Cool. Let's see what else. Kenneth implemented a new change on the XMLHttpRequest. So if you make a new XMLHttp request, or XHR as they are usually abbreviated, and then you can set a timeout property. For example, 10. I'm not sure if this is seconds or milliseconds. I would have to look that up. But this way, so if you do this before fetching the request, basically, it will then stop if nothing arrives after that timeout, instead of just keeping ongoing forever. So that's definitely nice to get more API coverage on that. Andreas did some work on Flexbox again. He actually recorded a video, so you can watch it on his channel if you're interested. And then lastly, No, lastly, that's it. That's everything I had to show you. Yes, lastly, this issue that Luke made, I wanted to shout out. So on the unhandled rejection stuff I just showed you, there was actually a bug in the spec that prevented us from implementing that correctly. And I think we had a FIXME for a long time there, and then Luke just went ahead and filed an issue about it, quite detailed, and then promptly someone went and fixed it in the spec. And that's how we got it implemented. So this was really cool to see. Thanks, Luke, for doing that. Yeah, now that's finally it. Back to Andreas.
All right, let's take a look at the June edition of the SerenityOS desktop. So the first thing I want to show you today is actually a little mouse trick. So you can now press Super H and it gives you this mouse cursor highlight thing that I think is going to be really sweet for screencasting and just recording stuff. And it's tweakable via the mouse settings. So there's a cursor highlight tab here where you can actually switch to any color that you might prefer, tweak the opacity and the size of the highlight. And all of this was implemented by MacDo. So thank you very much, MacDo, for working on this. I think it's a kick-ass feature and definitely something I'll be using in videos in the future. But for now, let's turn it off. And something I actually complained about, I think in the last monthly video, was this issue in the sound player application where I think pressing the play button didn't switch between the play and pause icons. Also, this visualization still looks wrong though, but the play pause button issue has been fixed. And that was done by network exception. I think the issue was that this is actually an action, and the action is, I guess it's not in the menus, but typically you can put an action into a menu or a toolbar or both. And when you change the icon of an action, we were not updating toolbar instantiations of the action, only menus. So thank you very much, network exception, for fixing that. Something else that's really cool this month is, let me open Pixel Paint for this stuff. So let's go ahead and write, why not the letter W for some reason. And we can save, oh no, not save, sorry. We can export to PNG. And this will now actually generate a compressed PNG thanks to the work of Kernel, who implemented ZLIB compressor for libcompress, and then also integrated it with our PNG encoder so that PNG files written, we used to write out uncompressed PNGs, but now we actually compress them with ZLIB compression. As you can see here, this is 13 kilobytes. Previously, it would have been just a raw RGBA stream, so significantly larger, I would think. And I think if you make a screenshot, our screenshots used to be something like 3 megabytes or whatever. And let's see if we can grab a screenshot right here. Screenshot is now 221K instead, which seems a bit more reasonable. Of course, I'm sure that we can still improve the compression. I think there are opportunities, especially in our PNG encoder, to select better filters, but it's still way, way better than uncompressed. So thank you, Kernel, for working on PNG compression. And some other stuff in Pixel Paint. We have I think there's supposed to be a levels dialog here. Yes, there is. So this was added by Torsten, who added this brightness, contrast, and gamma levels adjustment. So thank you for adding that. And we also have a bunch of work on anti-aliasing. So MacDo has been working on anti-aliasing like throughout the system this month, just doing a whole bunch of anti-aliasing stuff, like adding it for lines, which you can see here. Now we have anti-aliased lines. Of course, they are optional. You can still get these crusty pixelated lines if you prefer. And I think also for stuff like rounded rects. So let's make a rounded rectangle. I'm not sure exactly how we would do. Oh, that looks kind of weird. So by default, it's not anti-aliased, but you can get anti-aliasing enabled if you like. This UI here is very, very cluttered. We need to improve it, but it's always nice to see functionality come in and then sort of crowd the UI to the point where you feel, okay, we need to rethink the way the UI is structured. But this is really, really good stuff. So awesome to see more anti-aliasing primitives in the system, and Pixel Paint is obviously a great place to make use of them, but I know they're also being used extensively in the web engine, which Linus will talk about. And let's also mention briefly that there's a new layout system in LibGUI this month. So Ferhan has implemented a dynamic layout machinery for LibGUI, which allows us to express some more dynamic sizes for widgets, so that previously we were pretty limited to very specific forms of preferred sizes and size expansion. And Ferhan has worked a whole bunch on sort of allowing us to express better, richer, more dynamic layouts. And here's a kind of a subtle example of that, where the UI grows in a much more grows and shrinks in a more natural way when you resize it. And that's sort of the key example you end up with everywhere, is that UIs look more natural when you resize them. And I'm sure that we will interact with the new layout system in future videos, and we can talk about details then. But for now, I just wanted to call out that there is a new layout system in place, and that also means, of course, that we have a bunch of layout regressions in the system, such as resizing the browser window. It does look a little bit goofy, but it's a transition phase while we're migrating to the new thing. And when we have more code taking advantage of the new abilities, then we'll also be able to demonstrate more of it. And I guess in terms of things that are hard to demo, we have a whole bunch of kernel changes this month. Brian added a new build option, or we started using this build option that always initializes variables in the kernel. So this is to eliminate data leaks and via uninitialized data. So basically, anything that would have been uninitialized before, the compiler will just always make sure to initialize it now. So you can't accidentally share kernel information with user space via that. And there may be some small performance regression from that, but we haven't noticed anything. So far, so good. And speaking of security issues, Edun eliminated a KASLR info leak via this instruction that reads from the JS base register on x86-64. So that was really nice to get rid of that. And something I can show you is that Andrew added a procpid command line JSON interface. So this actually allows us to see the command line of the of any process currently running in the system. So let's take a look at how PID28 was invoked, for example, proc28 command line. And we can see that it's a resource graph applet with these command line options. So very, very nice thing to have. Just allows us to introspect running processes just a little bit more. Maybe we should do environment next. We'll see. Other stuff in the kernel, we've had a bunch of progress on ARM64 or AArch64 by Timon. And we also have progress on USB support by Jesse. And yeah, I guess there's been a little bit less things outside of the browser and outside of Jakt this month. So this is actually all I wanted to show you here. But now we're going to hear from somebody else instead.
Well, hello friends, it's me, kleines Filmröllchen. And I'm going to talk about audio, of course. There wasn't anything last month, but this month we have a couple of nice small changes to look at. So the first thing, and really most of the things, are in the backend. We had some fixes to the AC97 driver and to interrupt resilience, and GMTA and me did that, and we basically made sure that the AC97 driver can work with any buffer size and any sort of interrupt that is coming in. And in conjunction with that, I did a big rework to lower all of the latencies and buffer sizes that get used between the user line and the kernel. So that's really nice for a low latency system in the future. There's some blockades we have with emulation, but I hope that we can work around those or just boot on real hardware maybe. But either way, something that you might have already noticed in the system, which is actually from last month, is Linus's rework of the buttons in Sound Player. So if I play some audio here, you can see, also if I don't play any audio, you can see these buttons that are redesigned. They are now like the system buttons, and they are like the normal size for these kind of icon buttons that we have across the system. So this is very nice for consistency. Thank you, Linus. And that is actually almost all of it. For the final thing, I have to switch over to Visual Studio Code. So here we are back with Visual Studio Code. Now I can show you these nice spec comments that I did for the FLAC Loader. So this was, of course, inspired by the spec comments that we have in LibJS and all of the web stuff. And if you look here in the FLAC Loader plugin, you can see all the spec links. And if you go into the FLAC Loader CPP file, you will be able to find all of these spec comments which reference specific sections, like when you look at the algorithms in LibJS and in libweb, they use a similar thing. Metadata block stream info, for example, and there is loads of these. You can see all of them here, and it's a really nice thing to like help people get familiar with the FLAC format, and if they want to change something or fix a bug, they can look at the spec and see what the spec expects in these cases. Although I would argue it's not super complicated. We have most of the things implemented by this point, but still it's very nice to reference the specs. So yeah, that's what I did. And with that, I'm actually already done with all of the audio stuff for this month. So thank you very much, Andreas, for the opportunity. Back to you.
So that's all the stuff we had to share with you today. Thank you so much for checking in and staying up to date with our project. And a big thank you to my co-hosts of the day, Linus and Kleines Filmröllchen. Make sure that you subscribe to both of their channels here on YouTube as well for more interesting content. They both make SerenityOS content that I think you would like, so check that out. If you want to come chat with us, you'll find us on Discord. There's a link to the video Discord server in the video description below. And you can also come chat on the weekly live stream that I have here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time, except this coming Friday, when it's going to be at 8 p.m. Swedish time to accommodate my guest from New Zealand. And finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, you will find donation options to some of our developers in the video description as well. I'm personally working on this full-time since May of last year, as many of you know, thanks to the generous donations of so many of you. And I can't thank you enough. This is a dream come true to be able to work on just software as art, I guess, or whatever this is. I'm so grateful to be able to do this, and I can't thank you enough. It's really awesome, and not a day goes by that I don't feel super grateful. So thank you. Anyway, that's it for today. So see you all next time. Bye.